Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this very first AmCham meetup. My name is David Gaier, Public Affairs Officer at the American Chamber of Commerce in Belgium. We are live on YouTube and LinkedIn Live. Thank you for joining us. Our guest today is Karel Joos, partner at Interel. Karel, thank you very much for joining us today.
Hi, David. I hope you're fine.
Thank you. I hope you're doing well. How is it going working from home?
Yeah, well, it's a bit gloomy in the beautiful city of Antwerp right now. But on weekdays, my clients keep me busy, and on weekends, my books keep me company. So that's a good thing, I believe. I'm not complaining.
That's great. So this is the very first AmCham meetup we are organizing. So for the people, feel free to ask questions. We are live to discuss with Karel the future of public affairs, what it might look like in the future after the COVID-19, which hopefully will end soon. At the moment, as you know, we cannot organize events in person at AmCham, so we have decided to bring those events to you through those lives. So if you're working in your bedroom, living room, whatever, we're there for you. So it's very interactive. So please feel free to ask your questions. Karel, just a few words to introduce you. You joined Interel in 2008, but before you used to work also with politicians. You were advisor to the Flemish minister president. Then you worked in the federal cabinet as a chief of cabinet. So maybe a question to start, which challenges can we see for public affairs professionals at the moment? Which challenges do you see at the moment? How is it going now for public affairs professionals?
Yeah, well, I believe that after the crisis, we will enter into a period where the balance of power between the public and the private sector will be influenced by a feeling of payback time from the government side. And I think it will clearly affect public affairs. But on a positive note, there will be new demands from governments, but there will be also new deals with governments. And the deals might even move faster than in the past, where public affairs is always, it takes weeks, months, and sometimes even years. I believe that after the crisis, these new deals might come faster, but also with higher risk. For example, in the pharmaceutical sector, I strongly believe that the new reimbursement systems will come very quickly. But I'm not always sure that pharmaceutical companies will end up on the right side from the deal, at the right side of the deal, excuse me. But before I talk about what it would mean concretely for public affairs in the field, let's take a few steps back, and I have prepared a sort of a diagram to illustrate my reasoning. And if all is well now, it is shown on the screen, and I hope it's understandable and readable.
Can you take us through that graph?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So after the collapse of communism, I'm starting on the left-hand side of the diagram. Neoliberal economic theory conquered the world of enterprises, and gradually its principles were applied to the public sector. Some might even say it infected the public sector, but I leave that on the side for the time being. On the private sector side, so left above, it led to an enormous success of global capitalism with an enormous increase of welfare. But in the last few decades, also a very clear rise in inequality and a big problem of climate change, because we invaded habitats which weren't supposed to be invaded by us because of the growth and because of the burden we put on the planet. And some say nature is getting back to us now, providing us with viruses jumping from animals to human beings. On the public sector side, this neoliberal economic theory and its principles were a catalyst of modernization. Today, in the Flemish administration, we talk about het nieuwe werken, so the new ways of working. and this modernization in the public sector led to rationalization and a downward pressure on budgets and less government and more centralization to try and be more efficient. And some say that this is a good thing because that the public sector should be managed like the private sector. I don't think it's true because I believe that they play a completely different game. It's a game of profit versus a game of legitimacy, or a game of power. So it's profit against power, profit against legitimacy. And these two different games, they lead to suspicion because basically they don't like each other that much, companies and governments. But of course, they need each other, and they have to find a way of working, and they have to find solutions to make progress in policy making. And that's where public affairs professionals come in, of course. They're like a sort of corporate diplomats trying to build a bridge and trying to come up with solutions which are feasible from both sides. But this suspicion, this basic suspicion, leads to clashes, and the last big clash we saw was, of course, the 2008 financial crisis. And today we are experiencing another clash between let's say capitalism and governments around the globe. And we see, of course, many good things from companies. We see resilience, we see speed, we see creativity, we see innovation. But we also see the ugly face of capitalism, fraud, and people asking crazy prices for mouth masks, for example. So governments today in this crisis, of course, they are clearly in the lead. But I firmly believe that they will stay in the lead for a certain time. And we'll see two main drivers which are already there today and for the last few years. And the main driver from the private sector side is globalization, trying to find a new balance between globalism and local sense making, local reality. And on the public sector side, I'm pretty sure that we will see more government in the future and more budgets, and not alone in the healthcare sector. In a lot of domains, governments will get bigger because everybody now sees that they have a role to play, and that trying to cut them down because of efficiency reasons may not have been the best solution to the problems our world and our globe has today. So for public affairs, I see three main, and we are at the right hand side of the diagram now. I see three things. I see the need to making closer connections to policymakers. I see a need to tell better stories from the company side. And I see, thirdly, a need for more tailored public affairs. And these three drivers, these three factors, they are, of course, interlinked. But I believe, and of course, they are relevant yesterday and today, but they will be much more relevant after this crisis. So that's where we are. And Absolutely. That's where we're heading to, I believe.
So maybe let's take each one of those to discuss, and of course, people are more than welcome to ask questions if they have some. If you take the one about making closer connection, I think it's pretty clear that public affairs professionals are the link between the private and the public sector. But at the moment, we see also that some tools such as WebEx, Microsoft Teams are emerging. Could we see more of those tools in public affairs in the future? And do you believe that they are as effective as direct contact with policymakers or not?
The answer is yes and no. I think we will see more of that, but I'm not a big believer, and I'm not a big fan of trying to advance a public affairs campaign using Zoom It or GoToMeetings, because a stakeholder meeting is a live thing. When you're encountering policymakers, you need to be face to face with them, because in a WebEx or in a conference call, the impact you have is almost halved. 2 days ago, we had a stakeholder meeting because, of course, there was no option with civil servants from the finance administration. So there were 5 of them on one side, and there were 4 of them on the client side. Cameras were not used, so there you have 9 voices trying to solve a problem, an urgent problem, and it just doesn't work because in the beginning you explain your stuff, you try to define your key messages and getting them across. But once you get into a discussion and into a debate, it simply doesn't work. So what's your option? You can send slide afterwards, you can send documents afterwards, but it's less than half the impact you have. But I guess we all realize now that it is possible, and that for certain reasons you could have of course online contacts, but I don't believe, and I will never believe, that this kind of communication will make a difference in the impact of public affairs campaigns. Public affairs is about human beings. It's not about computers, and it's not about screens.
It's about being public. And do we see a different reaction from stakeholders when they are on camera, for instance, on WebEx or on Microsoft Teams? And then in general, is the impact very different? Do you have any experience in that, or concrete examples?
Well, you miss a lot of non-verbal communication, of course. And a lot of the non-verbal communication is essential to what we do. Because otherwise we could replace ourselves by robots and just send things, and that's it. And of course, there is also the networking part, which is now completely inexistent, which plays a role as well. You have to be visible, you have to be on the scene. All of these things are impossible now.
Yeah, and it's very, very crucial to have that networking part, of course, for public affairs professionals to have access directly to policymakers. Another point you make is also about the need to have better storytelling. In a sense, many people say that if you want to reach policymakers, you can have direct access to them. But nowadays, we also see that social media is increasingly important for them. Most politicians are on Twitter, on Facebook, some of them on LinkedIn. Is there a way public affairs professionals can have an impact also using social media, according to you?
Well, again, I'm not a big fan of digital public affairs in a way that it is managed by social media. For me, the impact of social media in a public affairs campaign is relevant at the beginning of the campaign to create awareness, and at the end to push things over the thresholds, like a cherry on a cake. But in between, because public affairs campaigns take weeks or even months, I'm very doubtful about the impact, because you can't have an impact on social media every day, every hour, during 2 or 3 weeks, or even 2 or 3 months. Social media is about right here, right now, the next 10 minutes, so to speak. So there is a basic incompatibleness between social media and public affairs. But I agree, in the beginning and at the end of the campaign, it can have tremendous impact, and it shows because there are a lot of campaigns showing it.
And what about the impact of the press? We see that nowadays TV ratings are up. People are looking for news, for ways to stay informed. Is that also a way forward for public affairs professionals, going more to the press and to the media? Is it risky?
Using media in public affairs campaigns always scares me a bit, because the probability is very high that you lose control, and control is what corporate diplomats like so much. Once you get it out there in the media, the journalists will take your story, will take your issue, and do what they like. But I agree that a lot of politicians are very mindful of what is being told in the media. So if you don't lose control, and if everything goes as planned, it has a tremendous big impact to move policymakers, to get them moving. But there's a big risk. And to me, it's second best. If you need media to get your public affairs campaign advancing, well, to me, something is wrong then. Because normally, if you do it the right way, and if you prepare it the right way, and if you have the right key messages, then you won't need the media. So there's two sides of it. I like to be like any diplomat, stay below the waterline, and you can find your solutions in a direct way, not behind the scenes, in all transparency, but in a direct way, without involving media or third-party influencers. It's about the issue, and if your issue is acceptable and legitimate for a policymaker, you won't have a problem.
And in order to have the great storytelling, the best storytelling possible, in that recipe, which ingredients can public affairs professionals use? Do you have some tips for them in the future? Because we don't know where we're heading right now. It's very hard to have access to policymakers at the moment. So what can they do to work on that storytelling at the moment?
Yeah, well, there is a basic problem for companies in storytelling, because citizens and activists, they always have the better stories, because they're the stories which come from the heart, per definition. But activists are bad lobbyists because they are not focused on getting solutions. They are focused on getting what they want. And that's not what a lobbyist does. A lobbyist wants a solution. So that being said, there's a lot of bullshit going around about storytelling. For any good story, you need a character wanting something and a hurdle in between. And you would have to talk as a company about this hurdle to getting to what you want and to what policymakers want as well. So you have a common objective. And automatically, you will have a connection, because this is what stories do. They make a connection. And this is the main complaint among companies. When interacting with policymakers, they don't listen to us. They don't care. The right question is, why do they don't care? Because they have no connection with what you are saying. And that's because you don't tell a good story. And I know it's very difficult for companies, but it is possible. It is possible in a lot of sectors. But you have to show the hurdle. And when you show the hurdle and the goal, you will get a connection with your audience, because they want you to cross the hurdle and to get to your pot of gold, to your goal. They want you to find a resolution, like in any movie and in any book. But it's the audience who decides about the quality of the story. It's not the storyteller. And that's another mistake a lot of companies make. They think, this is our story, the audience will like it. No. The audience decides, and not the storyteller.
Absolutely. And another related aspect, which is very related to what you said, is also the need, according to you, to have really tailor-made public affairs campaigns. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yeah, well, what I see a lot in the private sector is a sort of one-size-fits-all public affairs strategy and tactics. Somewhere outside of Belgium, on most occasions, in some regional headquarter or even a global headquarter, somebody is deciding about the public affairs strategy and the public affairs tactics. And it has to be implemented in every market, also the Belgian market. I don't think it's a good idea. It was never a good idea, and after the crisis, it will even be less of a good idea, because of this tendency for globalization and bigger governments, of course. So I firmly believe in adapting the main strategy, albeit on a global or regional level, but adapting it and tailoring it to the political government reality in your own market. And in every market, it's different. And that's the reason why I don't work in our office in Paris or in Berlin or in London, because I have no value added there, because I don't know and I don't feel the political system. You have to have people in your markets feeling the local public sector, government, political reality, and tell the stories to advance your interests given this local reality.
And I guess it's even more the case for a country like Belgium, which has different levels of power, a division of competences at different levels, right?
Yeah, and it's a small market, and I can understand that on higher levels in multinational companies, they don't bother a lot about this small, complex country with all of them, with all of them governments, and then this robotic, mechanistic approach to public affairs comes in, and it's a complete contradiction with what's public affairs about. It's about connections between human beings, between, of course, company people and public sector people, with civil servants, politicians, and managers. And we know, I already said it, basically, they don't like each other. But that's a reality. So you have two options. Or you do nothing and you go home, or you try to come up with a solution.
We are getting some questions, of course, to our audience. If you have any more questions, feel free to ask them. We will try to answer as many of them as possible. A question we have right now, Karel, is someone who's asking, how do you see the role of the C-level changing in public affairs in the emerging context?
Well, it's a question linked to what I just said. If C-level means local C-level, then I guess they will get more important and more instrumental. If C-level means headquarters outside of Belgium, I do hope that they will give the local management more autonomy in deciding on their strategy and their tactics. Yeah.
Another question maybe is also about the role of organizations like AmCham, VOCA, FEB, VBO, and so can they help companies in the emerging context, and how can they do it? Are they going to become even more important in the future? How do you see that for them?
Well, right now they are very important and they are very instrumental, because they are sort of a go-to structures for politicians to get things done and to speed things up. So in the crisis, I'm a big fan of midfield organizations like AmCham, like VOCA, like VBO, because they're a sort of a pivot between the corporate reality in the field and the government's managing the crisis. In any case, when I practice public affairs, I always advise my clients to be at least compatible in a public affairs strategy with what their sector organization is doing, because you have to move in a coordinated way. What these intermediary organizations after the crisis will do and will be, I guess their importance will not diminish. But of course, once a crisis is over and the normal interaction between companies and the public sector takes speed again, maybe things will go back to normal. But they should stay because they have tremendous value in the crisis. Because sometimes among managers in the corporate world, they complain about their sector organizations because there's a lot of them, they cost money, and we should rationalize, and it should be more efficient. It's the same reasoning about the neoliberal approach to the public sector, and I don't think it's a good idea. I'm a fan of intermediary organizations. I worked with one at Agoria, so I know it very well, but I think they should stay. And I don't think that there's too many of them. I think they have a lot of value as a pivot in a public affairs environment.
Well, that's very great to hear when you work at AmCham. That's very positive, of course. Another question which we are getting is also about Europe, the European Union. We know that the European also has influence on Belgian legislation and member states' legislation. So, how do you combine local realities with the European reality in public affairs?
Again, I'm not a very big fan of the European Union because I think it's a union of the minds and a union of the wallet. It's not a union of the heart. And maybe some people think, for example, in public health policy, which is now, of course, a member state thing, a member state responsibility for most of it. Some people say, yeah, we will see that it goes up and that the European Union will take public health in hands. I don't believe it because I don't think that it is stronger than the national hearts. What we see now is a revival of and with emotions, and it has to do with nationalism in a good way, not in a bad way, in a good way. So I don't think that this crisis will lead to more Europe, although I know that a lot of people are thinking otherwise. I don't believe it because of this mind-heart issue. The European Union has been a great thing for preventing war in Europe, for increasing welfare. I think it should stay a union of the mind and of the wallet. I'm not sure that it should become a union of the heart, and I don't think it's possible.
Another thing is also that what you talk about is also when you work in public affairs about trust, right? And public affairs is something that depends heavily on trust. So another question we have is, do you think that trust in governments or corporations has been impacted by the crisis? And if so, how can we rebuild that trust? Is it possible? How long will it take? What can we do?
Yeah. Well, big time. Everything I have said during the last half hour is because of that. I firmly believe that trust between public and private sector is damaged, has been damaged for the last decades, but this crisis struck another blow. I think that after the crisis, the lack of trust and the suspicion, that's why I wrote suspicion, and the suspicion will increase, and it will be fired by activism, by citizens, demanding a closer connection, not only with their governments, but also with the companies they work for and the companies they consume for. I think it's going in one direction, and that is a demand for more trust, for more connection, for being closer to each other. It's all around.
Another question, which is maybe a bit more general, is following the COVID-19 situation, do you foresee a stronger competition among or between sectors for available funding? We know that the crisis is going to hit really hard some sectors and the economy in general. And will this have an impact on public affairs? Will you need your public affairs campaigns to be much better in order to get better results? Or tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, completely agree. Because of course, there will be big deficits. So there will be competition for funding. And the companies and the sectors who are able to tell the best story and to make the best connection and to raise the highest sense of urgency or priority, they will win. So as far as I'm concerned, in my line of business, I guess we will have busy times because the pressure will be on. But as I said in the beginning, new demands will make possible new deals. And the challenge will be to be on the right side of the deal. But for me, the advantage is that things will go faster. And that was a main disadvantage of public affairs. It goes so very slow on most occasions. Now we will have access to more speed, but also to more risk. And yes, there will be competition for the scarce government funds, and I guess taxpayers will feel it as well, because governments will be looking for money. But also, that being said, sectors and companies who are able to create money for governments will be in the front row as well. Making life more easy for policy making and for governments will be a huge advantage. So it's very interesting to see which sectors will come out in front.
Maybe
I don't know. We'll see.
Maybe a last question before we finish this very interesting meetup, and I'm sure that we could talk about public affairs and politics post-coronavirus crisis forever. Another question is that, as you said, there is distrust, suspicion between the public and the private sector, but at the moment we also see that there is also more cooperation with the private sector, for instance, to produce medical equipment, masks. Do you think that the crisis will actually lead to more space and more productive and efficient cooperation between the public and the private sector? And can it benefit public affairs in the end?
Yeah, huge opportunity. It's a huge opportunity to get closer to policymakers right now, because the crisis forced. So it's a big opportunity to do something about this basic distrust and this basic suspicion. So yes. But on the downside, that if you don't do it the right way, that you're worse off, because when you're closer to policymakers, they see the good things, but they also see the bad things to it. But for me, basically, I tend to be an optimist. For me, it's a big opportunity to make this bridge firmer and shorter. So yes, the answer is yes.
Maybe a very last question before we finish this off. How can public affairs professionals who at the moment are at home, so it's difficult to have access to policymakers, to stakeholders, how can they prepare to be ready once we can get out and meet politicians again? What's the best way to prepare right now for them?
Take a good night's sleep to be physically prepared. I think that a good way of spending time is really think about improving your storytelling. And maybe that's one advice. Try to ask yourself, for example, why am I working for this company? Can I explain that to myself or to my children? And if I can't really explain that, why should a policymaker believe me or listen to me? So I think the coming weeks might be a time for introspection and trying to get an answer to the question: why should they pay attention to what we say and what we want? How to establish this connection between a sender and a receiver, between the storyteller? How can I move them? How can I get them to move? And for the rest, read a lot of books, because a public affairs professional should read a lot, and not only the paper, but books as well.
I was just going to suggest a very great book I have, and I'm sure that you will agree with me because it's the one you wrote. about lobbying. It's available in French and in Dutch, but it's very interesting. It's about the situation in Belgium, so it's really is a book I can only recommend for public affairs professionals. Karel, we'll have to wrap it up here, but we look forward to hearing from you in the future, maybe organize another meetup if you're willing to do it. But it was very interesting for our members. Thank you very much for your questions. We will organize other meetups in the future. So if you want to get involved, do not hesitate to reach out to the chamber. Karel, thank you very much once again for taking some time to answer our questions. We hope to see you again soon, in person preferably. But thank you very much for your input, and take care.
Thanks. Take care. Bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.